Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor who tries to help provide context so that you can understand what's happening in the war in Ukraine. For the last couple of months, I've done this weekly update where I looked at the headlines that I have sifted out of all the noise to find out where the signal is. And then I would, on Monday, Tuesday, something along those lines, I would give the review of those headlines and I would add a little context to some of the headlines if they didn't speak for themselves. So, if you want to know what's happened over the course of the week somewhat comprehensively, this is the right video for you. If you don't want to know all those things that have happened in Ukraine over the last week, then you won't hurt my feelings if you check out now. Okay, so let's go back to Monday, 23 October. Putin pushes more soldiers to frontline despite a failing offensive. What's happening in Avdiivka is just absolutely amazing. The best I can sort out is that Putin wants to really get to the border of the Donetsk People's Republic so he can run a victory lap saying we have captured the entire Donetsk People's Republic. It is now part with Russia. And the political will is there, but the military ability is not. But he thinks that there is because he only hears good reports. Or hears mostly good reports, and that's part of being in an authoritarian system. In contrast, Zelensky's special thanks to soldiers in Avdiivka direction. Zelensky is usually, coming to the front lines and handing out awards and doing things. He's much more connected to what's happening on the battle space. Russia deploys reinforcements to Avdiivka despite heavy losses, and there are multiple articles about that. One article is entitled, "Can the Russian army be that stupid?" Yes, they keep just throwing themselves up against it and taking heavy casualties. Also, we found that the post office casualty toll was up to 23, 6 dead, 7 critical. That was where the Russians shot a missile at a post office distribution center, and I mean, no military purpose. Just it's almost like wanton violence, like just for the sake of being violent. McConnell was backing Biden's $106 billion in aid for Israel pledge, and that's so you got the White House, you got the Senate, but the wild card is still the Speaker of the House. Okay, Tuesday, 24 October, Zelensky was talking about the illusion of Russia's Black Sea dominance is melting, and I think that's correct. I mean, the Black Sea Fleet had to back up, had to get out of their headquarters, had to move away so they could be out of harm's way because Ukraine keeps hitting them. Lukoil chair dies 2 years after replacing another chair who fell from a hospital window. Now that headline was fascinating because the headline was in Pravda. It's like the Russians don't want to say that this happened, but want to say that it happened simultaneously to like keep their people in check. It's a very, very bizarre, almost schizophrenic kind of personality. And I don't mean that in a clinical sense. I just mean like we're not bad, but if you cross us, we'll be bad. It's that kind of thing that they want to let their people know. Real estate prices are rising in the suburbs around Kyiv. I think that's a fascinating article. This was in the in Interfax Ukraine that tells us that people are optimistic about the future. They wouldn't have prices wouldn't be rising if they thought that they were going to be destroyed. Russia claims destruction of 3 boats off Crimea. Well, those boats tend to happen to be drones, and the Ukrainians are still kind of testing the waters, no pun intended, to find out where they can get through and where they can attack. Uh, Rosagin suggested that Putin attack Ukraine with space missiles after being wounded in the buttock. This was a fascinating article. So Dmitry Rosagin is the former head of Roscosmos, the Russian space agency. I talked about him before when I did the video about what it would be like to be up on the space International Space Station with Russians, and he's really just he's a very bombastic kind of figure, and he was coming up with the idea that they should just, send missiles from space to Ukraine. Okay. Ukrainian intelligence says that there's 400,000 Russian soldiers occupying Ukrainian land. That was from Ukrainian intelligence carried into Kyiv Independent. So it's not inflated figures, just trying to be propagandistic. From either side. I think the Kyiv Independent's probably trying to tell the truth. Poll, Americans overwhelmingly back aid to Israel and Ukraine, but still split on U.S. role in the world. Okay, so that was interesting because the Israel support is higher than Ukraine support, but not by a whole lot, but it is there. There is more support for Israel. But then the second part of that was to split in on the U.S. role in the world. Should we be so involved with what's going on in the rest of the world? And there's a split by party where weirdly Republicans are more isolationist, where usually the Democrats were the peace party, right? Like we're the doves and Republicans, we're the hawks. And so, yeah, so that's kind of switched. And that's partly because Trump's populism, that's what's going on there. But it's also generational. So the older you are, so I'm 50, people my age and older are with the hawks who are wanting to be involved, not even because I'm a globalist, because I'm not a globalist. I just recognize that we can't detach ourselves from the world. It just doesn't work that way. And so people in the much younger age bracket are the ones that are split and want to be isolationist. So the older you are, the more that you want to support, and the younger you are, the less likely you are. Okay, Ukraine, the big story on Tuesday was that Ukraine nearly assassinated Valery Gerasimov. And that wasn't a recent thing. It happened a while back, but it just came out into the headlines. And the assassination attempt of Gerasimov was that's something. There were a number of other assassination attempts, including hitting the Black Sea Fleet headquarters, hitting some general or admiral as he was running. Yeah, and so they're working on that. And there's also an MP who was recently an attempted assassination. Okay, Wednesday, 25 October, U.S. starts training Ukrainian pilots on F-16s. And so that's a big thing, but it's going to take a while for that to get up and running. So there's going to be successive waves of pilots that are ready. And so the ones that already have English proficiency and already have optimal training going into it will be in part of the first wave. And then it's just a matter of time till they get the F-16s. Despite losing limbs, Ukrainian sappers return to work clearing mines. This article broke my heart. It was a Ukrainian sapper primarily being interviewed, lost a leg, and he's out there clearing more mines. Like, okay, well, I know how to do this. I know what to do. I just want to get back out to the battlefield and help my comrades get out there and fight. Just like, if anybody would get a pass, you'd get a pass, but that's just, man, that's amazing. Russia continues to attack in Advika, not learning their lessons. Ukraine says it's ready to counterattack if Russia strikes energy supplies. So you know what happened last winter, where Russia was trying to essentially freeze out Ukraine. They had the points of indomitability, or I think that was the name of it. But they decentralized the power supplies to little points all around, so that they could make sure that people could stay warm and not freeze out during winter. So Ukraine's saying they're putting it on the table now. You do this again, we're going to start hitting you. Now, the trick is that Russia is so big that, so there's a phrase, the bigger they are, the harder they fall, right? Russia's so big that they can't possibly defend every point. They might be able to defend Moscow, but what resources they use in Moscow, they can't use in St. Petersburg and vice versa, and they can't use those on the battlefield to protect against. So, yeah, it's going to be bad if Russia goes down that path again. Russia says new missile systems takes down 24 Ukrainian jets in 5 days. Now, that was really interesting. I did a whole video on this, and I believe that they took down Ukrainian jets. I'm not sure if they were lying, and I don't think it's that. I think they could be embellishing, and it could be that. But more than anything else, it looks like they took down drones that would look like jets. And there's this weird symbiotic relationship between Ukraine and Russia in that sense. They get to say that they shot down 24 jets, and the Ukrainians get to have exhausted their air defense with these drones that cost more than the drone. So I'm not sure who's really winning in that, because Russia does get this propaganda victory. I guess Ukraine wins in the sense that they didn't really shoot down jets, but they thought that they did. But it's a very weird thing to watch. Okay, Russia conducts a nuclear strategic deterrence simulation, and they do this whole big thing, and it's nothing really to see, but it's propaganda value for them. Ukraine fields a new unit consisting of Siberian volunteers. it sounds better than it actually is. There is a unit of Siberian Russian volunteers, but it's not really that big. But you have Russians fighting Russians, so it's not nothing. Okay, Thursday, 26 October, Russia struggles for a symbolic victory in Avdiivka, and that's really what they're trying to get to. Lithuanian foreign minister was saying that we've only delivered 300,000 of our promised 1 million shells, and we need to do something about that. And it's true, they do need to do something about that. And you could see that verified in other sources that they really haven't delivered what they were promising to have delivered. Meanwhile, Orban doubles down at the EU summit, defending his meeting with Putin, saying we've got to, do something to get to peace. And so it's interesting. I was thinking about Orban. I was thinking, like, when the war is over, and I believe it's going to break in Ukraine's favor, but when the war is over, Orban's really going to be the black sheep of the European family. He's probably already is. I've spent the last almost year and a half now spending so much time defending Ukraine in these videos. I'm at like 800, 900 videos, something like that now, and I just so I have a stake in it. So does he. So whoever picked which side now has a stake in it, and they're going to have to live with what their stake is. Kolomoisky decides to transfer a share of 1+1 Media to management of a labor collective. I'm not sure why he did that exactly. He's being charged with some corruption kind of charges, but so I don't know if this is getting him off. I just don't know enough about the story to be able to speak to it intelligently, so I'm just going to admit my ignorance. Hamas delegation comes to Moscow. That's not a good look. Moscow already has a stake in fanning the flames of the Israel Gaza fight, right? The longer they can keep that dispute going, the more they keep eyes off what's going on in Ukraine, and that's what they want to do. Danilov said that Ukraine is to increase its domestic ammunition production. One of the best articles that I've read, one of the most important things that Ukraine can be doing. Now, they're going to need to decentralize it somehow so that Russian missiles can't cripple them. So it's going to be a tricky kind of thing. And to hide these defense munition production capabilities somewhere or defend it with air defense artillery or do something, but they need to be doing that. When they do it domestically, now they can hit Russia all day long. Speaker Johnson said Israel funding should be split from Ukraine funding. Now, that's not what he said last week when he was talking to Hannity, that he was going to support it as long as there was some accountability, but that's what he wants to do. And there's the urgency to do Israel, and I hope that our congressmen have the spine to say, if you're going to do Israel, you got to do this for Ukraine as well. This is not, and I just, it's amazing hearing. So, as you know, I'm a Republican, and I'm just, every time I hear a Republican parroting a Russian talking point about something or another of why we shouldn't be helping Ukraine. Well, Ukraine's different because, and then they spout a Russian talking point. It makes my blood boil. Okay, anyway, so Speaker Johnson's, that's where he is. Russia is suspected of jamming GPS in the Black Sea. And yeah, no doubt that they're trying to do that or trying to make it hard for GPS or for satellite or whatever to be useful to be able to attack them. And then finally, the last article on Thursday was Russia's executing its own retreating soldiers. And I've seen this as a trend. This is not new. This is something that just, it becomes... So if you spend as much time with the news as I do, you see certain patterns that emerge, certain trend lines, and this is one of the bigger trends right now. They don't want to fight in Avdiivka. They know that it's getting them sent to their slaughter. Okay, Hungary and Slovakia, this is Friday, 27 October. Hungary and Slovakia oppose EU's $52 billion allocation to Ukraine. Now, this is important because now Orban has a soulmate in Fico in Slovakia, and they're becoming a bloc that's going to be able to stop what the EU, as the EU, is doing. That doesn't mean individual members can't do the same thing, but the EU as the EU it could be a very powerful force. So this is Putin's strategy, and it's working for him to have a few gadflies spoiling what's going on. The Russian central bank raises its interest rate to 15%. I just talked about that yesterday or the day before. That's important. The Russian central bank has raised their interest rate. It's not because of trying to defy the interest because of inflation. It's trying to raise the interest rates to prop up the ruble, and it's doing something different. Now, the official interest rate is at about 6%, which is only 2 points above the 4% target. So it's not that bad. And some people will tell me, yes, the real interest rate is this. But even if that's the case, it's not for that purpose. It's to prop up the ruble. The If people want to buy the currency, they want to buy the currency because they believe in the health of the system, and the health of the Russian system is reflected in their lack of wanting to buy the ruble. Okay, I hope I explained that. Go watch Joe Blogs on this. He did a great job with that. Ukraine Defense Forces liquidate 560 invaders. That's like the low mark for the last 2 weeks. It's really weird because that would have been a high mark for most of the war. Evidence mounts that North Korean arms have been sending, or North Korea has been sending arms and weapons to Russia for Ukraine, and we're finding more and more satellite images and evidence of that. Zelensky claims that nearly an entire Russian brigade has been lost in Avdiivka. I think that's probably right. A brigade's 2 to 8,000, depending on what kind of brigade and how it's formatted. The British were estimating somewhere between 4 to 5,000 have been lost in Avdiivka. It's just, I just don't understand Avdiivka other than they have political orders and they don't have the military might to make it happen. ATACMS appear perfectly to exploit a gap in Russia's tactics. The ATACMS. I did a video on that where they're talking about how they shot down 2 ATACMS. I might get to that in a moment, but ATACMS are pretty powerful and hard to overcome. Former Ukrainian pro-Russian, this is the big article for Friday, former Ukrainian pro-Russian lawmaker was nearly assassinated on his own property in Yalta, Crimea. Now, Yalta's at the very bottom. If you look at Crimea and it has that kind of point at the end, at the very base, it's at the bottom. It's where the famous World War II conference was. Nobody thought he was going to be attacked on his own property there. This is a guy that, and Saturday, the first article was more about the assassination of Tsarev. That's his name, Oleg Tsarev. And this is a guy that could have been Zelensky's replacement had the war worked out really well and Putin got to cherry pick who he wanted to put in charge in the meantime. Yeah, so he's a bad guy, and he was helping the Russians target Ukrainians apparently, and so, there's that. So I don't feel bad for the guy. I mean, I'm not for assassinations, but this is, if he's helping the Russians in the war effort, he's now placed himself in that kind of position. Okay, so let me back up. So when you're targeting a general or a colonel or something like that, it's all free game. You recognize these are the combatants, and so this political figure, that's odd, that's unusual, but he still is within, he's placed himself within that. Okay, first ATACMS shot down. Is there more to the story? This was in Eurasian Times, and this so I did a video about that as well, and you got to go back and watch it if you haven't watched it. So the Russians said that they shot down ATACMS, but what they actually did was the ATACMS hit their targets, and that's how they were destroyed. Well, that's not exactly shooting them down, and yeah. Okay, Lukashenko says that Ukraine and Russia are at a stalemate. Okay, and he wants to say that. He wants to get that propaganda point forward. Lukashenko is a key ally of Putin, and whatever Putin wants to communicate will be communicated through his surrogates like Lukashenko. They're at a stalemate. We just need to negotiate. Of course, Putin wants to negotiate where he is, holding on to this territory, and yeah. Germany supplies a third air defense system to Ukraine. That's the Iris-T. I have mad respect for the Iris-T. It proved itself really well since the war began, since they started using them. Russians losses around Avdiivka are the worst of 2023. The British intelligence are saying this. The Americans are saying this. Yeah. Avdiivka has quickly become one of those places that you just remember about Ukraine, like Bucha or Mariupol or whatever name comes to mind. Avdiivka has got taken place with that as well. Okay, so Sunday, October 29th, Speaker Johnson says he'll introduce support for Israel, but not for Ukraine. I think this is a mistake. I hope he gets resistance from that. Remember, he has a razor-thin majority in the House of Representatives by 4, and he can't afford to make a misstep. He can't afford to have somebody move to vacate. It's bad. Okay, Russia says it shot down 36 drones aimed at Crimea. Now, I'm wondering about this after I did the video about the 24 planes, and then I see this about the 36 drones. I'm wondering, are the Ukrainians potentially just trying to feel out defenses, or are there, kind of dummies, like drones that weren't going to do anything anyway, that they're using their missile defense on, or what? I'm not sure exactly what the story is, but I'm sure they're thinking through what's going on. Okay, anti-Jewish mob storms a Dagestani airport as a flight from Israel arrives. There are pogroms and anti-Israel sentiment in many places all over the world, and including in Russia, which these are Russian citizens that other Russian citizens are trying to attack, and Russia's not doing anything about it, but they're happy to gin up the controversy because it helps them with Ukraine. One of the marks of authoritarian governments is that they don't mind using people in order to get their will or agenda. Now, democracies can do that too, but it's on steroids in authoritarian regimes. And they're using their own Jews as bait for these Arabs so that they can keep the controversy going. Okay, Lukashenko calls the war in Ukraine a stalemate. And then finally, there was an article here, and I'm debating whether I'm going to do a video about it. Tell me what you think. It was called No More Culture Wars. And it was an RT, and it said things that if it was on Fox News as a conservative, I'd have been like, it would have resonated with a lot of it would have resonated with me. It was just so what one of the things that RT does, the reason that it appeals to conservatives is because they try to, and conservative in Russia is not the same thing as conservative in the US or Europe. What they're trying to conserve in Russia is very different, but they speak conservative language in RT in order to kind of speak to the conservative crowd, in order to kind of get them to embrace other things that they're saying. I studied the Third Reich in my master's thesis in public policy, and Goebbels said that there was like he was complaining in his diary. I read his diaries. He was complaining in his diaries about how I have to play that they gave out these radios that only had one station. You could only get one station on. It was the official German station, and he complained that he had to play 70% of popular music in order to get his 30% of propaganda out. And that's kind of the same thing. Like they have to speak so much to American conservative kind of values in some ways in order to get their propaganda points in about Ukraine and other things. But they do that. And as I read that article, I was thinking like, yeah, that resonates, and this resonates, and this resonates, and that resonates. But I also understand that it was RT, and they're doing this intentionally in order to speak to that crowd, to move them into their agenda. It's really sick. I mean, the way that they manipulate like that, but they really are trying to work on the conservative audience, and that's I just find that infuriating. Especially when conservatives fall for that. So, okay, thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention, the likes, the shares, the subscribes. Thank you for the coffees. I really appreciate it because this is a lot of work. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.